The title of the presentation is no coincidence. That's a 10,000-foot view. OpenLayers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the OpenLayers system or library. Not a whole lot, but a few of you. OpenLayers is kind of like Drupal in regards to it's got a bunch of layers in and of itself in the libraries. It's very complex. It's like an onion. You keep peeling it back and you keep finding more and more functionality buried in the libraries. There's no way we could cover the entire depth and breadth of it, but I'm going to try to hit a high-level view. This is how you get it installed. This is how you get it configured, generate your first maps, and from there on you can dig into it as deep as you want to. And I'll have a demonstration of the site we actually built for a property management company here in town that takes advantage of a lot of the GIS functionality and theming and customization you can do with OpenLayers. What I'd like to go through is just a brief overview of some basic GIS concepts, because you kind of have to understand some basic GIS rules and concepts before you can really take advantage of OpenLayers. How OpenLayers fits into the scheme of a GIS interface between Drupal and a lot of the mapping services out there, and how to integrate that in with Drupal and leverage the Drupal modules and the architecture to make take advantage of the OpenLayers functionality. This is just a basic definition of GIS systems, straight out of Wikipedia. In the simplest terms, it's the merging of cartography, statistical analysis, and database technology. You're going to take maps, you're going to take data, imagery, multimedia, and you're going to roll it all right on top of a content management system and let it take care of the hard, heavy lifting of getting everything where it needs to be, filtered down the way you need it to have filtered down. It's not something that was prevalent really to the web community until a few years ago. Some of you who have GIS experience know back in the day you had expensive servers, expensive software. You had ArcInfo and Esri and Intergraph, to name just a few of them, that had GIS systems, but they were very limited, very constrained, and just they were hard to work with. And then we got into the map points and the Google Maps and all the navigation systems, and then now GIS has evolved to a point where it's available to anybody who's got an internet connection at some level of functionality or another. And just some simple systems. Many people may not think of these as GIS systems, but they are. Google Maps doing real estate searches. You're tying data about the houses. You're able to search on it. You're able to apply filtering, look at different views of the map, sat images, traffic images, whatever. It's, one we see every day, but no one, a lot of people don't understand what that involves. Google Earth's another great example. It's probably even more so because you can tie any kind of data up against a coordinate system on the planet using Google Earth. And GIS systems, the modern systems, are built on several basic standards out there. There's standards organizations. All the large GIS companies are involved in them as sponsors or contributors. A few of the basic technologies that are used for data interchange: web feature services, WFS. You'll see that mentioned a lot in OpenLayers and mapping in general. It basically is a vector data source, and it gives you points. It gives you outlines of like states, counties, voting districts. It can map out countries. You get into the web map services, WMS, and that's where your image tiles come from. The Landsat images, some of your traffic overlays. Some of those are vector, some are raster. But that manages the actual imagery for the map. GML is another vector-based, feature-driven data source markup language out there. It's WFS, GML. They share a lot of functionality and features, but they each have kind of their strengths and weaknesses. So some services prefer one over the other, and you're going to get good data either way. It's just what you're looking at pulling from. There's many others. I mean, there's GIS has been around for decades. So there are a bunch of other standards out there. Some are legacy, some just didn't really take on. Some of them were the Betamax of the GIS industry. So, but they're still out there. There's still systems, especially government systems. A lot of them are running some of these older protocols and these older formats. Then you get to OpenLayers. The OpenLayers library itself is a pure JavaScript library. It's cross-platform. It's not server-specific. It's not even server-driven. It's browser-driven. It's a standard supported. They're part of the OSGeo consortium, which Autodesk and a couple, three of the other really big companies are involved with. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but if you go to the OSGeo website, you can see them. It's a pretty healthy list. WFS, WMS, GML that I mentioned before, OpenLayers supports them right out of the box. Don't have to do anything. There's about a dozen different data formats that it can handle. It integrates with free and commercial services. So, Yahoo and Google and MapQuest and Bing and those guys, they'll limit your usage for free usage, or they'll restrict the resolution, or only so many hits a month or a day or whatever. There's also open source versions out there. OpenStreetMaps, Mapbox, CloudMade. They've got different stuff available. But your feature set's going to be a little bit less rich with those because of the open source nature. And the other, really great thing about OpenLayers is it is platform independent, using JavaScript as its main interface to these systems. The OpenLayers module kind of pulls everything together. It pulls all your data from Drupal, pulls your data from these other outside sources, and pulls the OpenLayers library all into one place on the site where you can manage your data presentation, your data collections, your filtering, styling, you name it. And the guys who wrote the module and maintain it have done an incredible job. They keep it very current with what's going on in the OpenLayers source project itself, and their documentation is impeccable. They've got probably 10 or 15 document files in their module distribution. When you get into it, some of it's a little cryptic sounding until you read the actual OpenLayers library documentation to get a feel for it. But once you get to that point, it's pretty well documented. It doesn't really care where the data comes from up to a point. It uses views primarily to manage its data. But again, if you can get a data collection into it in some way or another, you can leverage it. Views is just the easiest, fastest way. It's the most standard way all of us are used to. Chaos Tools, it's got an exportable capabilities in it. You can set up styles, map presets, layers, and you can export them using CTools and import them in from somewhere else, just like importing and exporting views and content types and that sort of thing. So that's actually a required module for OpenLayers. You obviously have to have a location module of some sort, be it the actual location module, the WKT field that comes with OpenLayers, some other address field, as long as it supports one of the mapping standards that gives you a lat long or gives you a meters XY coordinate system that the mapping systems know how to talk to. And of course you need the actual OpenLayers module itself. And this looks kind of like a daunting list of concepts, but to kind of get a grasp on OpenLayers and what each of the features of the OpenLayers system is capable of, you kind of have to understand some real basic concepts. First and foremost, OpenLayers is named that way for a good reason. It's based on layers. Just think of transparencies, pieces of paper, whatever stacked, you can pull them out, you can mix them, you can shuffle them. You have a base that everything lays on top of. They're vector-based, using those web feature service data sources, or they're raster-based, using your web mapping services. But the base maps and overlays come into that layering architecture as well. You'll have a base map which everything stacks on top of. So if you're thinking Google Maps, you've got your terrain map, you've got your highway map, you've got your hybrid map. Those are your base maps. And then if you show hotels, restaurants, real estate, those are overlays. So kind of to give you a common model that you're probably more familiar with, that's pretty much all base maps and overlays are. Projections. There's a lot of technicality behind the projections. Suffice to say, it's a method of calculating your location on the planet. There are two of them that are recognized by OpenLayers primarily. It'll support several others, but most of the services out there use these two. They're called 4326 and 9000913. What that basically means in a nutshell is 4326 is your traditional lat long that you see on all your map services, your GPS systems, your navigation systems. It's most of the mapping services out there use it. Most of your feature services are going to use it. It's a very standardized, especially with GPS capabilities and taking out the umpteen digits on your coordinate. The other one is an older standard based on meters, measured from I cannot remember for the life of me what the designated center point of origin of the planet was. Probably Greenwich for all I know, but everything else seems to center on Greenwich. But it's based on meters, up and down, left and right from that origin. Not used as much because it's considered not as accurate in some ways. So you'll see both used interchangeably from time to time. The nice thing is, the only time you have to mess with those projections is whenever you're adding layers manually to the system, and you'll hit one of these web feature services or web mapping services, and it'll tell you, I am a 4326 source, or I'm a 9000913 source, and you just have to tell OpenLayers this is what you're getting. And if you don't get that right, you'll wind up with the city of Atlanta sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So it's pretty obvious to tell if you got that setting right or not. Controls. Get your standard map controls, right? You got your zooms, your pans, your layer filters, your scale markers, things like that. Those are all handled as JavaScript objects and JavaScript-driven controls, and they use an image sprite system, a coordinate system that's documented in OpenLayers. Those are treated as a separate kind of component in the OpenLayers system. You can add them to the maps, hook them to the maps, but you don't have to have them. But obviously the maps are kind of useless without them a lot of times. Styling. You go to Google, you see a pop-up. You go to Bing or whatever, you see nice little cool little upside down drop markers and pin markers, and they'll change color, and you hover over them and they'll change state. That's where the styles come in. And OpenLayers gives you capability to style based on the whole map, on an individual layer, or even right down to a single point. It even has capability of handling what's called clustering, where you can tell it to take everything that is just too doggone close together to separate out, clump them together into one lump point, and it can actually manage those data points for you, manage the presentation of the data underneath them. And that kind of leads into the behaviors side of OpenLayers. These behaviors are JavaScript behaviors. Is anybody familiar with Drupal Behaviors, the JavaScript layer in Drupal? So yeah, it's one of those kind of black magic, black box things nobody messes with too much. Well, Drupal has a chunk of the document object model that it defines for Drupal behaviors. They're usually hooked into jQuery code. They're driven whenever a document loads. This is what your way of basically hooking into the browser at that point. OpenLayers is able to customize the way it acts by hooking into those behaviors through the OpenLayers module and the OpenLayers library itself. It's a picture's worth 1,000 words. I could show you at the end of the presentation a site that takes full advantage of things like styles and behaviors, but it allows for extremely fine-grained customization, because you can actually override the output that, for lack of a better word, that OpenLayers generates. It's like templates in Drupal. You start off with node TPL, and you can make a node look whatever you want. Same thing with this. You can start off with a base OpenLayers behavior, and you can modify it, tweak it, whatever, and you can make it do whatever you want. You can make so you click on a point, it plays a trumpet sound, or shows up a pop-up, and you can do that based on whatever you're clicking on. And this is where we kind of get to the fun part of it. This is actually where we're going to set up a map. There's 4 basic steps, really. Once you've got your modules installed and set up, I've already taken care of doing that. It's, you get those key modules, the dependencies will sort themselves out. Once those are set up, then you got to get your data in. For me, I just loaded a spreadsheet up of 5,000 business addresses, loaded them through Node Imports, kind of my favorite tool to use for that sort of thing. You can do whatever you want. You can use, load them via feed. You can load them up via existing data access that you've got set up somehow. But I just loaded like I say, there's a bunch of business locations up. But the most important thing there is you got to make sure that you have some content field that knows a lat long or a meters this way, meters that way coordinate system.
Can I just, you use that term lat long, you're talking latitude?
Latitude, longitude, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's latitude, longitude. And most of your location-based and mapping-based CCK fields are capable of doing that. You give them an address, they'll geocode it, which basically go out and they hit something like Google or Yahoo or whoever, and they say, here's my address, give me the latitude, longitude. So as long as your data has an address location that those servers can resolve to a coordinate system, that's pretty much all you need when you're putting data in. Some of the modules will give you finer grain control where you can actually, pull up a map and you can click on a point right there. I want my GPS coordinate right there. So that's the hard way to do it if you're doing a lot of data, obviously. But the address fields, location, I was talking about with Eric, location's got it's a love-hate relationship, the location module, but it does do a very good job of geocoding. OpenLayers has its CCK field, which you can handle geocoding as well on the fly. So that's the only real requirement for your data source. Your content type has to have some form of location data. The next thing, this is where we get into views. Because you're generating lists of data and you're pumping them into a map, views is a logical place for these guys to plug into OpenLayers. It's actually, believe it or not, for those of you that aren't familiar with views, we're not going to get anything really too scary here. There's not a whole lot of stuff you have to set up in views to make this work. But I'm going to walk through just setting up a simple data layer that OpenLayers requires to put on a map. Okay. Right here, for instance, this just is kind of a quick sample. That's a map that I have no data loaded into. I just told OpenLayers, jam this block in here. Just use the defaults, throw a map in. It took, once you install the module, it takes, a couple of seconds to type the code in, and that's it. Not a whole lot to it. But when you want to get into actual loading data, that's where it gets a little more fun.
So where did you get that map?
That map's generated by OpenLayers. It's actually generated on the fly. It comes with a default map setting that you can pull off of to base your layers off of and your map presets off of. So all I did was I just said, hey, just take this default map setting. I'm not going to give you any data points. I'm not going to give you a zoom level. I'm not going to tell you what part of the planet to look at. Just give me a map. And it did. It could be as simple as that, but that one's not very useful because it's got nothing on it. But it's a full-featured map. You can, I've got zooming capabilities. In fact, I can zoom in. That's all. The system's already got that built into the default presets. That's before you've loaded any data on top of it, but it really doesn't take much once you get the system installed. It's already got a lot of functionality available to you.
Is that data online? It's not local to the server, is it?
No, that's actually being loaded off one of the open source systems. It's called OpenStreetMaps.
Gotcha.
So this has a services connection to that, as opposed to you're not storing anything on your MySQL database, right?
The only thing I've got on the MySQL database right now is I've got all my content nodes that have my business locations.
Okay.
That's all I've got loaded in here.
All right. And you've got a services connection set up to the...
Right.
Okay.
Right. I've defined it. We'll get into where you define those layers and how to activate them. But it comes. OpenLayers module comes with about a dozen different map layers already defined in it. Adding layers is not all that difficult. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we're going to have time for tonight. But it's pretty straightforward to add them, especially since it's all web driven these days. To get data into the system, though, you've got to create a view, and you don't have to do anything overly fancy with it. It's just because it's just returning unformatted data. So what I'll do here is I'll create a new view called dealer, View tag, not worried about it. I'm going to be pulling from nodes. I built a basic content type that's got nothing but the location module involved in it. You got no CCK fields, nothing like that. In fact, I'll show you real quick. Probably would help a little bit. I mean, it's plain stupid simple. I don't have any fields added to it at all. Location module, basically you can tell location module I want all nodes to have a location associated with them. So I just took advantage of that because it's a one-to-one deal. I don't need multiple addresses for these nodes. Set up those, set the basic settings for locations, number of locations. Again, this is going to vary depending on what location data module you're using. This has got all the different fields that it can load. At a bare minimum, usually you need to have at least a city and a state, or else the geocoding services won't resolve a lat-long address. The more specific you get, the better. Give it a street address, it'll resolve it to the best of its abilities to write on the street. So it's just going to give you the coordinate chooser. You can enable that depending on the module you have, and you can actually pick specific GPS coordinates off of the live map, and it'll work off of those. But what I did was I loaded the street location, city, state, and zip code, defaulted to the United States for the country, and I told the location module generate my address coordinates. And it, as it's loading those data, those nodes in, it actually generates the coordinates on the fly. It's the easiest way in the world to do it. Yeah, there's nothing else to it. I mean, I kept it as base, simple as possible to prove you didn't have to have 1,000 modules installed to get this thing to work. So, okay, so back here. So we know I'm working with a content type. It's got a location feature built into it. I'm going to use a node. So you get into views, and there's it's not going to take a lot of setting up here. We're not going to mess with the defaults right now. We're going to go ahead and just define an OpenLayers data view right out of the bat, because we're not going to use that default view at all. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a title, because later on when we're assigning this data to a map, we're going to need to have, it's easier to pick out if you give it a title. Otherwise you just see, OpenLayers _1 data or something like that, which is wonderfully helpful. You got 5 or 6 of them. Okay. Okay. As far as our style goes, this is pretty much canned for you. You don't have any other options when you define an OpenLayers display. OpenLayers data. And what you'll do next is, probably items to display. We probably don't want to limit it to just 10. Let's go ahead and make it unlimited. And it's griping because it wants some fields, which we're going to define in a second. All right, so next we'll go ahead and define some fields. And what we're going to do is I want the title of my node, because obviously if you want to see the data at that map location, you want to kind of know what you're looking at. So let's add the title. Then we're going to go in and we're going to pick, in this case, the location module. Again, this is going to depend on if you've got a CCK field, you're going to pick content, and then you're going to pick the correct field for that. But in this case, location. I would like the latitudes and longitudes, because the location module's already calculated those for me. And for display, I'd also like the full address block that the location module will render for me. I don't want any labels in my address field. I just want it to print the address. And I'm going to let it give me whatever it wants to give me. I don't think it would really matter if we left that label in, but I always remove it just to play it safe. And with the latitude, longitudes, you want to make sure you disable the ellipsis because you don't want extra decimal points showing up in your coordinates. And the display style. OpenLayers works with the degrees, so instead of 38 minutes, so many seconds, whatever coordinate system, it wants 38.956372. So it needs the decimal degrees coordinates for both the latitude and the longitude values. And this should be longitude field. Take that out. Decimal degrees. Did hit that, didn't I? Okay. Error message went away, thank God. Okay, so there's the bare minimum. Actually, the bare minimum is the latitude, longitude, but you're not going to see anything if you don't put something else in there. So now what you do is you've got your fields defined, you've told it you've got an OpenLayers data style, and you're going to go configure that style. And this is where OpenLayers asks you, what do I do with all these fields you just picked? Grouping field, we're not going to get into at this point. This is something you can dig into if you need to do data grouping, some sort of collation of data. It starts messing with the OpenLayers logic a little bit when you start grouping the data, if you try to add any special behaviors into the system. So we're not going to mess with that for right now. Map data sources. It's asking me, well, what do you want me to use from the data fields? Do you want me to use some lat-long coordinate system based on some fields you've got? Or are you going to give me a bounding box of coordinates? Or am I going to use this OpenLayers CCK field? The only reason I didn't use the OpenLayers field is because the import module doesn't talk to it. So, but again, the functionality is pretty similar, so it's not really going to affect the setup of a view like this. We're going to pick other lat-long because we're going to say we want to manually pick our latitude and longitude fields. So right there, pick lat, pick longitude, and here it wants to know, by default, OpenLayers will enable a pop-up behavior for your maps. And it wants to know, well, what do you want me to put in the title of that pop-up, and what do you want to put as the description for the location of the pop-up? Well, we've got the title, one of the fields we picked, and I'm going to use the address as description, so it's going to be the detail on the rest of the pop-up. Those two checkboxes right there about keeping re-rendered or non-rendered attributes. What OpenLayers does is when it generates the data from this view and sends it to the map layers, the mapping layer is going to have a collection of what it calls features. And features can be points, they can be symbols, they can be polygons, circles, rectangles, whatever. And each of those features has a collection of attributes associated with it. And that's the OpenLayers library does that. What views and the OpenLayers module will do is take all those fields that we just picked, and it'll translate those into attributes on those features, the OpenLayers library. So what it's going to see is it's going to see a bunch of data pre-populated that you can use later for advanced theming or behaviors. And so down here what it's doing is it's saying, do you want to keep both the raw and the fully themed output for each of these fields, or do you just want to keep the fully themed values for these fields? And I usually just keep them in there. It doesn't hurt anything. And at some point when you're doing your advanced theming, you may want the raw data value. You may not want that. And it doesn't take the fully rendered themed value. And then the attributes that it's talking about up there are actually listed right down here. And within the OpenLayers system, these are the identifiers that you can use in the JavaScript to access those attributes on those features. So this stuff will get used when you get into more advanced theming and more advanced behaviors, but this is where you find the information, and that's what all this means. Basic mapping, probably don't even need to mess with it. Okay? So now we've got a data layer. And let's save that. Oh wait, no. One more thing. Filters. So we don't want to return everything in the system. And real quickly, I'm going to set it to publish nodes and nodes of a specific type. Published, yes. And I only want my dealer nodes. All right. And this is kind of one of the bummers about OpenLayers. You see this down here. You don't get live previews and views with the OpenLayers data. You kind of have to set it up, cross your fingers, and hope you set the view up right. You'll find out real fast when you look at the map if it worked or not. But generally, I mean, sometimes I'll actually set the default up that just gives me a raw field output so I can kind of check myself, but it's not necessary. Save that view out, and what we've just defined is we've just defined one layer in a map. And what we'll do now is go down here and create a map preset. And a preset basically defines a map in the system that you can use anywhere in the system. And that is managed pretty much entirely by the OpenLayers module at that point. And,
One question,
yep.
so I couldn't render that view in the standard way that I would show views on the site so far?
No, not whenever it's the OpenLayers display itself, the OpenLayers data display. It's used internally by OpenLayers. You can try to grab the data. It's not going to come out with much of anything. I think it's going to come out with the node ID, the title, and maybe one other field. It doesn't really views when you tell it to render that display. That hook is not fully implemented in the OpenLayers module itself. So it kind of gives you the bare minimum. But then OpenLayers under the hood will go out and manually grab and format all that data like it wants to. Okay, so we've got the view. Go to OpenLayers. And by default, OpenLayers pulls its library from the hosted location on the OpenLayers servers themselves. This is one caveat with the OpenLayers module right now, is that the library is at version 2.10 and has several fixes in it, some feature enhancements. It's incompatible with the 2.9 library. The Drupal module is written for 2.9. There's not a whole lot you're going to lose between 9 and 10, and I know the guys working on the OpenLayers module are getting caught up at 10 right now, but they changed just enough stuff, it kind of screwed them up a little bit. So the safest bet is just go ahead and serve up to retrieve the 2.9 version of the libraries like this. It's already defaulted into the system. It wants to do this anyways. And it just, unless you have a reason to host it on your own servers or use a different version of the library, just don't even touch it or you're asking for trouble. The default preset, again, that comes built into the system. It's used as the base preset that all other new presets are built from. And to do that, we go over to the presets. We'll go ahead and add one real quick. And all this is basic information here. Name, dealer map, issue identifier, dealer map, preset description, optional. You can tell it, I want this map to have a certain width, a certain height, auto wide. Unfortunately, you can't do an auto height with this system. But go ahead and set up your size and your width there. I'll go ahead and make this a little smaller than the width of my window, just so you can see what it'll do. Image path, CSS path, those are for advanced theming. You're providing your own control sprites and your own control imagery and things like that. For these purposes, we're not going to mess with those. Proxy hosts, that's if you have to go through a proxy to get to the OpenLayers library that's hosted somewhere else. We're not messing with that. Hide empty map, that's kind of like in views when you say hide a view if it's got empty data. Pretty much I like just showing the map because you can tell then what really happened. Center and bounds. What this lets you do is it lets you tell the map where I want you to start off at when you first draw it. So, in my case, I'm going to go ahead and tell it, I'm going to start off in that region right there. It goes ahead and calculates the center point. It already figures out what zoom level it's going to need based on the width and the height I told it earlier. And I can tell it to restrict extent. And what that'll do is it'll keep the user from zooming out any further from this view than I just defined. They can't go outside those extents. I'm not going to restrict the extent because we just want to be able to play with it. Behaviors. Now remember I said earlier, behaviors is where you can hook JavaScript into the system and you can start really grabbing a hold of how the map handles data. OpenLayers defines several standard behaviors already in its system. The OpenLayers module implements those in the Drupal interface so that you can get to them pretty easily. Attribution basically allows you to attach those attributes to the features that we were talking about earlier. Leave that in. Pop-up. It asks what sort of layers I want to apply it to, which I'm going to get down to at the bottom here in a minute. Tooltip, it can actually do a hover over, throw up a little bit of information. Layer switcher, this is where you can turn on and off the base maps and the different overlays. And then several of these others, your pan zoom bar that gives you your basic map navigation controls. I'm going to go with all the defaults. It's just going to make it a lot easier. It's going to give us most of the features we want. All right. Remember I said something about the map projections earlier. This is where you get to tell it, I want this map to be primarily this coordinate system or this one. And it tells you, of all the stuff you got loaded in the system, I've only got 3 things that are defined as 4326 coordinates. And all these are defined as this. So primarily I'm going to let this map be use the 900913 so I can have access to all the data that's in the older meter-based coordinate system. But I want the map itself to render using this other projection system based on latitude and longitude. Now these settings, unless you really start messing around with alternate mapping services and feature services, you really don't have to play with very much. I've honestly never had to change them on anything I've mapped out. And these are all the predefined layers that OpenLayers for Drupal comes with. I don't have the API set up on here for those, but I do have, since these are open source, we can snag those. So they'll make those available by default. You can set the default base map, and this will be the map that everything gets drawn on top of. And then you come down here and you look at all the overlay layers. Well, look, we've got our dealers layer right there. So we tell it, yeah, I want you to put that thing on the map. Yes, I want it to be turned on whenever the map renders. And yes, I want it available in my layer switcher so I can flip it on and off manually if I want to. These styles, again, that's when you get to advanced styling and you set the system up to apply certain colors, sizes, scale factors, graphic images, and you tell it here which styles to use that you've defined in the system. We're not going to get into those probably right now. Everything else we're going to go ahead and take default. And one other thing, got to go back here. In the behaviors, the pop-up, and I'm going to save it first, sorry. You got to save it, let it know that I'm using what layers you're using, and then you go back to the pop-up and tell it to enable the pop-up for which layers. You can actually selectively set those pop-ups. So some layers are strictly display and some are actually interactive. And it's thinking. Anybody questions so far, or is everybody lost?
Yeah, that pop-up that you mentioned, you can feed in the title and description. Can you add more fields to it?
Up to a point. You can't. One of the things that when they went from the OpenLayers module version 1 to version 2, they drop support for views formatting. So you know, in version 1 you could use views theming, and you could actually access those. Version 2 gives you more features available, more access to the OpenLayers underpinnings, but you lost a lot of the views theming. So the short answer is yes, you can, but you have to use some advanced JavaScript behaviors to get at those. What you do is you can pick all the fields like we did, let it pass it through to the features, attributes, and in the JavaScript you can grab those attributes and build your own pop-up based off of those. It takes a few more steps, but okay, so we got that. Saved our preset. We've got to go back and tell it to apply the description. Darn it. It does my description. Fine.
What about 3D?
3D, OpenLayers does not support 3D, I don't believe. It's meant strictly as a plate type system. You get into 3D systems, I don't know if there's one available for Drupal or even an open source one. There may be, I don't know. Are you aware of one?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay, there we go. It finally saved. We go in. Okay, here's the pop-up. I want to enable pop-ups on that layer. Again, you can select layers or not select them. System will handle that either way.
Wi-Fi's really slow.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Can you handle spatial queries for results, or can you stuck with everything?
Spatial queries as in proximities, distances, bounding
Well,
boxes.
if you have 100,000 dealers in the United States and the users assume the majority, can you limit the results set to just the stuff that's otherwise you get overwhelming, right?
Yeah, well, that's probably going to run into a little bit here. What you can, there's two ways you do it. One is you can do it using views. You can apply the views filters to filter the data down using one of several ways. The other option is you can use a Windows feature servers, web feature services, and those get a little more involved, but they can handle. The OpenLayers will send it a bounding box, and it'll only return the things in that bounding box. But you're getting into several layers of setting up server architecture, an in-tier architecture at that point, because you have to have a feature database, a feature server, and then you have to tie this against that.
So it's good for limited data sets.
It's good for limited data sets unless you play with some of those other, you find some feature server that does what you need to do already.
Or you can attribute the data, right? I mean,
You can attribute it. Like I said, like some of the stuff we've done, we've limited it based on certain tags or field values, and you can strict the data set real fast doing that. Okay, so dealer map is presets defined. The last piece, and this is actually the way easiest piece, go back into views. We'll bounce back to our OpenLayers view because it's already defined. And now that we have a preset set up, it's going to let us define a new page. And it's going to give us the option of making this page an actual map.
click over it.
And then if you click the settings for the OpenLayers map, it'll ask you which of the presets you want. We're going to pick the one we just created. And because it wants a path for the page, we'll just give it a nice simple path. And that is all you do to actually hook the map up. And this might take a little while because I didn't apply any filters to the data this time. And something broke. Great.
You override the default display. So if you go into the data
So dealer's map. Crap. I wish
view, so that should be data now instead of map.
Okay, page. OpenLayers map. Dealer map. nothing different there. Where'd you?
You set map as the default, so your data layer changed from a data layer to another map layer.
Yeah. Thank you for catching that. Override.
So you're rolling back the default to data and override?
Yeah, the default, it should state data. I accidentally flipped that over. Thanks for the catch. And that should show us the map. That's going to be... it's crunching on that.
I have a question about clumping if you're waiting.
Oh, go ahead.
So clumping, is that the idea that if you're looking at all of the U.S., then you might see one flag in each state that you have a dealership, but then when you zoom in
Yeah.
at a certain level, then you
Start seeing the dealerships
see
breaking out.
individual ones?
Yeah.
Is that standard with all of the map services like Google Maps and so on, that they have some kind of a
Actually,
capability?
OpenLayers is capable of doing that itself. It'll actually load the data, and when it tries to resolve it to the zoom levels and everything, it'll look at it and say, hey, these are too close. They're too many pixels. They're not enough pixels apart to resolve a separate. And that's definable. You say 10 pixels, 200 pixels. And once it figures that out, then it'll go ahead and say, you know what, you got too many data points stacked up right here.
But that kind of feature is typically available in all of the, something similar to that is available in other GIS systems that
A lot of them do just because it gets too busy. Yeah. Okay, let's see if this will go ahead.
It's definitely available in Google Earth.
Pardon?
It's definitely available in Google Earth, so if you use the geotag photos
Good.
and pull
That's
out
what I was
those
wondering.
Show
private KML,
me some love,
click on
guys.
that,
Oh,
that
jeez.
waypoint, it'll explode out
The
into
display style probably
seven
lost those settings.
associated with seven.
Well, I've seen it, I just wondered as far as for the
Probably lost
implementing
all
it
those
as a
settings.
user.
Yeah, it did exactly.
It'll inherit whatever that base
Long.
source is.
It's that UI we were talking about.
Yeah, our favorite views UI that we were discussing earlier. All right, this probably will work a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so I didn't specify a zoom level. So, zoom in there. Zoom a little further. I got pretty dots. If you click on one of those dots, there's your title, there's your addresses. And if we go over here, check out all the different layers that we told it to go ahead and use. Go ahead and grab that one. Do that. So you can toggle between the base maps, and you can turn your layers on and off. And to add more layers, all you do is you go back and you create another view, set up another OpenLayers data view, hook it up, and then go back into the preset and say, add this layer to it, enable it, activate it, put it in the switcher.
You want to show that climate example? You want to show your climate
Yeah.
example?
Now, once you get into some of the, you get past the 10,000 foot view and you start getting about the 1 meter view, you get into customized style tooltips. And for this client, they have several markets that they have properties in. And within those markets, they have several sub-markets. And within those sub-markets, they wanted to filter down to just their specific properties on sub-markets. So this is where I applied filtering strictly using views itself. So if we pull up the property listing out of the Buckhead sub-market for them, see, it looks a little bit different. And this was all done using JavaScript, a little bit of PHP glue, and some great graphics designers. And very rich pop-ups are available. I can hook light boxes into the pop-ups without any problem, using Ajax under the hood to go out and grab these property data sheets so that I don't load my page up when I do the initial load. All this data is tied to that data point now. So this is how rich you can make a GIS application using OpenLayers. If you start leveraging the data management in Drupal, start leveraging the JavaScript capabilities, jQuery capabilities, and really start digging into the guts of OpenLayers itself. This is what you can do with it. It takes a little bit more work, though. And but thankfully the documentation is pretty good out there on both the library and the module itself. So,
It's good to see there's still a client given the Atlanta real estate market.
yeah. And there's a sample of flipping off different layers. This thing's hooked into the Yahoo system, so you can see the actual Yahoo layers all showing up now. But, and then here I'm not actually using exposed filters here. I had to hand code some stuff, but same principle.
So the data that's feeding those overlays, if I was interested in epidemiology or civil conflict or something, and I needed to look at a map in real time and watch stuff happen, the data source, it just depends on the data source that's feeding that layer.
OpenLayers is meant for static presentation in regards to it's going to grab the data and then that's it. It's not going to go keep refreshing automatically. With the JavaScript behavior layer, you could set up, like a JavaScript-based timer event and tell it to go out and refresh that layer. And what it'll do when it refreshes that layer is it'll go requery for if it's using a view or if not using a view, it's not going to do it. If it's using a feature server, it will requery it. If it's using a view, it'd actually have to reload the page because the view's only rendered at the time the page is rendered, unless you had some sort of AJAX under the hood, and you were invoking an AJAX call to go re-execute the view for the updated information and then refresh the layer with that data. Again, that's doing something like that where you're sitting there, you're just looking at the page and it's constantly updating and refreshing. That's going to be a little trickier to do.
Or it's responding to some sort of SQL trigger. I've got new data. Everyone who's viewing that page initiate a redraw. Like flush what's there and draw what the new data.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably, off the top of my head, I don't know how well it would support that, to be honest with you. I think it's getting old.
At some level, it's still have to pull.
Yeah, I'd have to pull. It's going to have a hard time pushing the data out. You're going to have to pull it. So.
Is there an elevation primer anywhere in the documentation?
The OpenLayers itself just handles latitude and longitudes, but you can have an elevation loaded into your data. If you have your content type, you're gonna have the lat long already. You can also put an elevation field in there, and you could do things like I was talking about the advanced styling using JavaScript. You can actually have conditional styling, so you can tell it that I want to make anything that the values is between 1,000 and 2,000 feet elevation, make that blue, and then anything 2,000 to 3,000 make it green, or make them different sizes. Some of the samples I think out on the OpenLayers library website, openlayers.org, they've got some where it was based on population density, the size dots. And it automatically generates those based on just a JavaScript rule.
Yeah, there's emerging markets, like for example, in the real estate industry, those same kind of maps, being able to map the floors in a building, showing what spaces were occupied. And essentially, if you had an elevation, you can use layers to kind of draw those
right
on your map.
Yeah, you could do that, but then just going to get unwieldy because you're going to have, you're going to have how many layers, however many you want to break down. I mean, you could do it. The OpenLayers doesn't care. It's as long as you don't exceed the limits of JavaScript. But yeah.
Think about his request. If you had data that was like tagged with this happened in some epidemiology in week 1, week 2, week 3, you brought that back with views. Couldn't you potentially use jQuery to hide everything but week 1 and then show week 2 and show week 3 and are you able to manipulate the pins
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah.
Could that be possible though? Basically.
Yeah, you can set them up as
certain
different.
layers.
You can set them up as different layers, and then you can enable those layers, turn them on and off. If you want, if you're talking about like an animation, or you're talking about
Yeah, like so all the one layer would have all of the year's data, but if you could select a jQuery like pins of week 3, then you could show week 3.
And based on, while you're formulating an answer to this query, and based on a threshold, so if the data set returned by a particular query needs to have a certain weight to it.
Mm-hmm.
So X number of events happened, now display that layer.
right. That would be getting into where you have the attributes. You'd have the fields in your view that would be attached to the features for OpenLayers, and then then you'd have to develop a custom feature or a custom behavior that would know how to interpret that data and how to react to it. Do I, if it's weighted, do I give it different color codes, different sizes, different symbols? As far as the showing and not showing things, you can do it manually already with the layer selector, but you can also, the layer selector is nothing but a JavaScript event handler. So you can trigger that event handler to turn those layers on and off.
Okay.
So, wake up. So that's kind of the beauty of it being written strictly in JavaScript is, even though it's managing all that data, there are a ton of entry points in there and hooks where you can manipulate. I mean, it's literally things like, you'll see it'll be a JavaScript object, OpenLayers.map, and then and then whatever you want that map to do, and a function set for a map in OpenLayers.
You had mentioned, just to follow up on the point that you made about making calls to the, I guess the APIs. I noticed that you used Google and Yahoo Maps. How often can you pull from the APIs? Because I'm thinking that as each person goes to the site,
Right.
they may have to make a call.
Yeah.
And like I know with Twitter or something, obviously with a Twitter account, you can do PHP and check once an hour or twice an hour or something. But how would you do it in this? Wouldn't it pull from the map?
Yeah,
all the
it
time?
pulls-
Would you download it to the server? Or?
It pulls from the map server every time. It doesn't cache it. The only way it might cache something sort of is if the browser caches it, because ultimately the JavaScript in OpenLayers is executing an AJAX query up against those map tile servers. So it's kind of, at that point, it's browser dependent as to whether any of that information gets cached on browser side. But as far as the
Now, are Google and Yahoo
Service.
very restrictive in terms of API?
what was it we found out, Bo?
It's
It was,
huge. You have to have a really big traffic site.
Yeah,
Close
I don't
to
think that the biggest problem I think you determined was that we failed to get past a certain zoom in level.
Yeah.
So where you see in that one cluster, one of the concerns in client review was that was a little crowded. And, could we zoom in, the zoom hit a...
Yeah, like Yahoo won't go any closer than that.
You've
With
got
the
a-
free API.
Got a place on Piedmont where there's essentially a pod of buildings, so our numbers are, and the addresses are all the same because they're all the same. It's this cluster of buildings. And
Yeah.
so we wanted to zoom in further, and at a certain particular point, Google wants you to pay, I think it's $10,000 a year.
Yeah, it's 10,000 a year.
Wow.
So they're
proud
very
of it.
generous up to a point, and then they're,
And then you do what we did. You enable the open source OpenStreetMap server, and you can zoom right up that far.
So does OpenStreetMaps have something similar for an enterprise user?
It's free. OpenStreetMaps is totally open source.
But if I wanted to self-host, if I have tinfoil hat issues,
Oh.
and I don't want someone observing the
Gotcha.
queries and where I'm querying.
Man. I'm going to give that a qualified yes, there is a way. Mapbox has several large data sets that they can either let you attach to or via an Amazon storage APIs. And you could also, since we're talking about OpenGIS standards here, there's no reason you couldn't set up your own map server in-house. And there's several, open source as well as commercial map servers out there. The only thing is you have to provide all the data. So you got to get that from somewhere. and that's what was I was talking to somebody. I was chatting with somebody on Drupal.org one day, and I think he said something about one small region. It wound up being like 135 megabytes of data for one like small town for the tile data. Because a lot of these new Landsat, if you're doing Landsat, it's going to be a very large data set because it's down to like 3 meters now, 3 meters per pixel. If you're doing vector data, it's going to be a lot. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck because it's all just lines and polygons. So as you notice, I mean, just load time wise, you know, you hit Yahoo, even though that's on a big content delivery network, I'm hitting a free one here. So the vector data is going to be smaller, it's going to serve faster, and it might be more practical because there are data sets out there you can get set up with something like GeoServer does, WFS and WMS serving, and it's a Java-based server. And so what you do is you'd set one of those up, you'd load all your data into it, get it configured, and then you'd point OpenLayers at that, say this is where I want my map tiles, my map features to come from.
Speaking of privacy, just add real quick. When you're talking about the map, though, that's not actually, they're not seeing the data you're putting on there.
No, they don't see that. Yeah.
So all they're saying is that you zoomed in on this state. They have no idea what you put on it.
Yeah, but that
Okay.
So guys, we're coming against it on time. Why don't we do one or two more questions? Does anybody else?
One in the back.
Can you speak, you showed us how to do points, can you speak a little bit about lines or polygons? Will it handle, specifically, and I don't want to get too much detail, but I use Esri, shape files. So I'm trying to get something from a GIS application onto the web that I can share with landowners.
Okay.
Will OpenLayers handle polygons?
Yeah, the vector layer will handle shapes, points, and certain predefined marker types. You can also, depending on the data you've got, let's see, layers. These are all the different formats that OpenLayers understands. So if you can get it into one of these types of formats,
From SV to one of these formats.
right. If you could get something to serve the data up to OpenLayers in this format, then it can handle that. As far as the shape files and go, there's a the WKT field module that I was talking about earlier is an alternative to the location module. That has support for coordinates as well as polygons. So you could load polygon data into that. And I think there's about 20 or 30 modules out there that integrate with OpenLayers. I think a few of them implement some other shapefile geometries and formats as well. That basically they'll just add another format here, you pick it, give it the parameters, and it'll create the layer for you. Make it available in that list of layers when you create a map. We've got one more?
Just a comment on setting up your own database or your own map server. Data changes. And if you set yours up, you're sitting with old data within about an hour.
Yeah.
So,
well,
depending on the scope of what you're doing and how much importance there is in being accurate, we require constant updates or at least timely updates.
Yeah, and again, what you could also do is some of them, I'm not quite sure what GeoServer's implementation is, but some of the ones I've looked at will actually, you can kind of tell to merge the data. So you tell the actual, your own server, go grab the raster tiles from Yahoo, but load your features from my internal server and merge them and then serve that data to me and nobody else. So you can do there's some hybrid, again, that's where the open standards come into play, is you can get that interchange and mashup of data from different sources fairly easily.
It's all relative too. I mean, I won't name names, but somebody before we were working on this, the solution at hand was to have large aerials taken and printed, and each time iterate those with push pins. So, you know, that data was a whole lot more harder to update. So this looks like a, you know, gigantic tectonic leap forward. So.
Yeah, I mean, once you get into the content, I mean, it's just Drupal data at that point.
I've also been able to make this pretty much iPad friendly, which was a requirement going in, and
and there's your data. So I imported the title, I imported those fields, it went out and pulled those for me automatically. And location module gives you a nice Google map you can pop up, but you don't really need that. And as far as editing goes, it's the content's easy to update. So if you had different data, you had your weights, or you had a market area or a sales rep or something like that. I mean, I've some applications out there could be, I have sales territories, load in some prospects, and are these prospects worthy prospects or not? You have them mapped, you could click next to it, and it could load the tiger data from the U.S. Census that tells you the demographics for that area on a different layer. I mean, you can get that complex and integrating tools, and so it's kind of, once the basics are fairly restrained, because it's meant to be a simple way to set maps up. But then once you want to get into the more advanced stuff, like we did with that Cousins Properties site, then you're pulling a lot of data in from different places, and it's able to do it. It just takes a little massage, but.
Thanks a lot, Robert. I appreciate it.